Atlas never barked without reason. Out in the frozen wilderness, his silence was my only certainty. But that night, his ears pinned back a growl, rumbling low as he nosed toward a snowdrift. I followed, expecting a wolf, maybe a corpse. What I found was worse. A girl, half-buried, lips cracked with blood, her blue dress shredded to ribbons. She was barely alive, marked with a scar I hadn't seen in 10 years, one tied to my own past. I should have walked away. Instead, I lifted her out of the snow, and with her came the ghosts. I enjoying these epic Wild West stories. Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist. You'll never forget. It was a cold, so deep it seemed to settle in your bones, a stillness that had nothing to do with peace. The land was a brutal canvas of white. A winter so fierce, it had already claimed 3 good men I knew, turning their breath to frost and their blood to ice. My dog Atlas was the only thing I trusted out here. He was named for the dark patch that ran from his nose to the base of his tail like a scar on the new fallen snow. He'd survived blizzards that turned mountains into ghosts and a half-dozen close calls with wolves. He didn't bark unless it mattered. I was Elias Cole, a man who'd left a different life behind, one of quiet promises and polite lies. Now, all I had was a horse named Shadow, the feel of a rifle in my hands, and Atlas at my side. We were 100 miles from any semblance of civilization, and that's exactly where I wanted to be. We were riding the ridge when the wind shifted. It didn't just change direction, it carried a different kind of cold, a sharper, more desperate scent. Atlas's ears flicked. He turned his head into the biting wind, a low rumble in his chest. I felt it too, a prickling on the back of my neck. "What is it, boy?" I mumbled, tightening my grip on the reins. Shadow shifted beneath me. The dog loped ahead, a dark blur against the stark white ground. Atlas rarely broke a gait unless something was truly wrong. I spurred Shadow after him through the skeletal pines and over a frozen creek that gleamed like a forgotten blade. The world out here was unforgiving, a place made of forgotten things and broken men. I'd become one of them. Atlas stopped dead. I dismounted slow, my boots crunching in the thick snow. My breath plumed out in the sub-zero air. He stood over a huddled form, half buried in a drift, as if she had been trying to hide from the cold itself. She was curled in the meager shelter of a collapsed rock, face her body, a pale, shivering ruin. Her skin was the color of old parchment lips, a cracked, bloody line. The dress she wore, once a soft blue, was torn to ribbons, a fragile flag against the brutal landscape. My stomach twisted. The scent of her was the same scent the wind had carried, one of pain, of despair, of a life being bled into the ground. I knelt beside her, a wave of sickness washing over me. I laid the back of my gloved hand near her mouth. There was breath, thin and dry, like the whisper of a dying fire, but it was there. Atlas sat back on his haunches, his gaze unwavering, as if he was waiting for me to do something. I took my canteen and got water to her lips. She swallowed once, a spasm that shook her whole body. A small, ragged cough rattled in her throat, a puff of frozen mist. Her eyelids fluttered, but they didn't open. Without a thought, I hoisted her into my saddle, tying her in place. She weighed nothing, a hollowed-out bird. My horse was a big mare, but this girl was so small, so broken, she seemed to vanish against the leather. I mounted behind her and guided Shadow toward the foothills to an old hunting shack I hadn't used since the last spring thaw. It was better than leaving her for the wolves. Atlas ran ahead, a dark sentinel in the deepening twilight, as if he knew she belonged to something that mattered. By the time we reached the shack, the wind howled like a ghost. I got the door open, its lone hinge groaning in protest, and set her down on the old cot. The place was frigid. I tore my shirt into strips for bandages, and then with a heavy heart poured whiskey into the angry red gashes on her bare arms and legs. She didn't wake, but her body jerked at the sting, a violent, desperate flinch. I worked in the flickering lamplight, cleaning her limbs, picking frozen briars from her feet. Her ankles were raw, her ribs too sharp. Someone had hunted her or left her for the hunted things. I slept near the hearth, the rifle across my lap, one eye open. Atlas curled beside her, caught his head on his paws, watching her breathe. It was 2 days before she opened her eyes. They were a green I hadn't seen since my mother's garden in East Tennessee, not pale, but deep and vivid, like moss pressed into stone. She didn't speak, just looked at me. I offered her water. She took it and drank, her throat working in small, silent gulps. "You know where you are?" I asked. Her lips parted. Number, she didn't say more. I waited, but the silence stretched. "Your name." She swallowed again. No, I frowned the lie hanging in the frozen air between us. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. But I'd learned long ago that a lie told by a wounded woman was always worth hearing out. "You got a mark?" I asked, my voice low. "Tattoo scar, a pendant." She blinked once. Without a word, she raised her arm and turned it over. On her inner wrist, just beneath the ragged edge of her dress, was a strange circular burn. It wasn't a brand, not a stamp of ownership, but a deliberate scar. A ring of fire. I felt the breath catch in my throat. Something cold and old moved in my chest, a memory that had been buried for a decade under layers of silence and solitude. I'd seen that mark once long ago on a folded letter with my name burned into the corner. In another life before this life of endless snow and quiet violence, I had been promised to a girl. It was a strange arrangement, a desperate bargain between two families. Her name was Mercy Thorne. She was from some faraway town in the east, the daughter of a family with debts and a dying reputation. I had never met her. I'd only seen a small miniature painting on the back of a letter and the mark on the wax seal, a ring-shaped burn her mother had used in old ways not spoken in town halls, a kind of mark to ward off evil. She had disappeared 2 years later and the marriage was called off. I had never thought about her again. Until now. The girl in the shack healed slowly. She spoke little but watched everything. When Atlas left her side, she missed him. I saw it in the way her fingers twitched against the cot's frame. She slept with her hands curled like claws, and I heard her cry out at night, not with words but with broken sounds, names maybe, or memories she hadn't claimed yet. I didn't press. Not yet. One morning she asked, "Why did you stop?" I looked at her, at the raw hunger in her eyes. "Atlas found you." She looked at the dog. He looked back, his gaze steady. "Why didn't you leave me?" "Didn't seem right," I said simply. She looked away toward the small frosted window. "You've done wrong things before." I met her gaze. "Plenty," I said. She nodded like she'd known that all along. By the 6th day, she could walk. I gave her one of my old shirts, a belt to tie the fabric into something less wind-torn. She took it with the quiet grace of someone who knew better than to ask for more. "You'll need a name," I said. She turned toward the window, the bitter light catching the soft curve of her jaw. "I like Mercy." I didn't react, just watched her as the wind flattened her hair against her cheek. "Fine," I said. "Mercy it is." Atlas whined low, a soft sound. The room fell still. She turned toward the dog and said, not to me but to the frigid air between us, "I think I was supposed to find you." I didn't answer. Outside, the wind rose howling like a wolf in a trap. Far off, a bird screamed like it knew what she meant. Days later, I caught her trying to start a fire, with her bare hands striking stone against stone with a shaking fury. Her fingers were blistered, her face hollowed by a pain I hadn't yet named. "Who did it?" I asked. Her eyes turned to glass. "They thought I was dead." I nodded. I'd seen that kind of mistake before, the kind that left a person walking long after their shadow had given up. I let her stay. She helped me repair the roof, fetch firewood, boil water. She never asked what I did before this life. I didn't ask what she remembered. But every night I watched her turn the burn mark on her wrist against the firelight like it was a compass pointing somewhere buried deep. And then one night she stood at the door, Atlas at her side, and said, "I want to find them." I didn't have to ask who. Atlas growled, a low guttural sound. "I'll need a gun," she added. "You ever shot?" "No," she said. I got up and opened the old wooden chest. The revolver inside had belonged to my father, a Colt Navy blackened with age. I handed it to her. Her hand closed over it like she'd always known the weight. And I knew then, it wasn't chance, not fate, not mercy that had led my dog into that snow. It was the promise I'd never meant to keep, and the reckoning that waited with her name burned into it like blood. She learned to shoot with a quiet rage. She never flinched at the recoil, never smiled at the sound of a bullet hitting the rusted tin cans I set up. She struck them all within a week. I said little, just adjusted her grip when needed, reminded her to breathe before the trigger broke. She didn't thank me. At night she'd clean the Colt by lamplight, disassemble it piece by piece, until the gun was as familiar as breath. Her hands, once shaking from hunger, grew steady. Her back straightened. She started wearing my old boots, too big but durable, and the sheepskin coat I'd outgrown. The collar brushed her jaw like armor. Atlas never left her side. They moved together, now scouting frozen creeks, watching for changes in the sky, circling the perimeter, like they expected something bad to catch up any day. I knew better than to ask when one bitter morning we found a rider, half buried beneath a frozen pine, face down, arms splayed, shot clean through the back. His horse was gone. Wolves had already been at the body. Mercy crouched beside the corpse and lifted the man's coat. Something in her face changed. She reached into the inner pocket and drew out a coin. It was black and flat, etched with a crude symbol, a circle over a cross. The mark of the Winter Riders, a group I'd heard of and never wanted to meet. They weren't outlaws, not soldiers either, just hired blades killers with no flag, no home, no rules, but the one written on their coin, silence for silver, death for gold. She stood and said he was one of them. You remember, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I remember the one who gave me to them. I held her stare. Who, my father, she said. She said it plain. No tears, no catch in her voice. Just a bare, sharp truth that cut through the cold air. Atlas growled again. The wind changed. We rode south toward Frostbite, a town choked in salt and frozen bones. The Winter Riders had been last seen there. The shack stood behind us, empty as a cleaned grave. Mercy wore the gun on her hip, now her hair tied back with sinew thread. Her shoulders narrow but braced. She didn't speak for hours, just watched the land roll by in silence. I knew that look, the one you wore when you no longer belonged to the world before pain. Frostbite rose from the earth like a scab. Half the buildings were burned out. The saloon leaned eastward like it was tired of standing. I rode in first, Mercy behind me, Atlas underfoot. The sheriff was gone. The post office was boarded up. Only the general store had life. Dim lamps, 2 horses tied out front, and a girl sweeping the porch like she knew she wasn't welcome on either side of the door. Inside, a man in a gambler's coat looked up from a stack of flour bags. Mercy brushed past me and placed the black coin on the counter. Where's the man who carries these? She asked, her voice like ice. The gambler's eyes narrowed. What's your stake? My name, she said. The man hesitated. I stepped forward. You want to keep your jaw? That was enough, the gambler said, his voice a low growl. He nodded toward the back room. Reckon you'll find a map on the wall, marked in charcoal. 3rd camp down the Black Ridge. They stay mobile. They expecting company, I asked. They don't expect anything, the gambler said. They just wait. The camp wasn't hidden so much as placed where no one sane would go. The Black Ridge cut deep into the land, sheer walls of ice and frozen scree. Only one trail led to it, flanked by dead trees and twisted iron stakes from some old mine. Mercy walked ahead. She moved like she was returning home. I hung back, rifle ready. Atlas stayed between us. We spotted the first sentry at dusk. Mercy shot him through the eye. No hesitation, no tremble. The second man died in his sleep, his throat slit clean. She took his knife. I didn't ask if she'd done it before. We reached the camp's heart by firelight. 6 men sat around the coals. 2 women were chained nearby, gaunt and barefoot. A wagon loaded with crates sat in the shadows, one wheel cracked canvas stained with what I didn't want to think about. Mercy stepped into the circle of firelight. The men rose confused, half reaching for their guns as she drew first. 2 fell before they fired. The others scattered. One ran toward the wagon. I shot him through the back. Another tried for the rocks. Atlas leapt and tore his leg out from under him. Only one man remained staggering toward the fire, his hands raised. He saw her and a strange look of disbelief crossed his face. Mercy, he said. Mercy Thorne. Her hand trembled. I stepped up beside her. You know him? I asked, my voice a whisper. She nodded once. He was the one who said I'd be better off this way. The man's face twisted into a knowing smile. Your father made the deal. I know, he's rich now. Sold the land. Took the name clean off the rolls. You're dead, girl. You died 2 winters ago. She shot him in the knee. He screamed and collapsed into the snow. I live, she said, then shot him in the heart. We burned the camp, freed the women, buried the dead. Mercy stood over the ashes until the sun cracked the horizon, her face unreadable. I said nothing. I knew revenge could quiet the past, but it never silenced it. Still, there was a peace in her shoulders I hadn't seen before. She looked at me. I need to find him. I nodded. Atlas barked, once a sharp sound of agreement. St. Elmo's, Mercy said. That's where the land records went. That's where the lies live. I saddled the horse. Then we ride. The trail east was long, but she rode without fear. The bride was coming home. St. Elmo sat on the edge of civilization like a drunk at a church pew, pretending just long enough to get what it wanted. It was rail lines and red sashes, polished boots with blood underneath. The kind of town that bought silence in bulk and buried mistakes out back behind the chapel. We arrived by moonlight. I left the horse tied under the sycamores half a mile out. Mercy walked ahead, Atlas a silent shadow at her side. She wore no bonnet, no gloves. Let them see her face, I thought. Let them guess what she remembers. No one noticed us at first. The night was loud with fiddles and poker girls laughing sharp like broken glass in the saloon windows, but Mercy wasn't heading there. She went to the courthouse. It was locked. Of course it was. She didn't pause. She drew the Colt and shot the lock off clean. I raised a brow. Subtle, I said. She didn't answer. Inside, the air stank of mildew and old ink. Dust motes floated like unsettled spirits in the moonlight. Mercy moved to the ledger desk, prying open drawers until she found the deeds. She knew what she was looking for. Here, she said, holding up a folded page. The paper was yellowed, but the name was fresh: Alistair Thorne. August Corwin, buyer. Transferred 6 months after her disappearance, sealed with a notary's emblem. I recognized an old family crest burned from the war, thought to be extinct. She turned the page. There, scrolled in the margin in a four-in-hand, property cleared. Heir deceased. She stared at it until her knuckles paled, then she ripped the page in half. We didn't sleep. Instead, we followed the paper trail across town. Each name led to another: bank manager, land broker, church official. St. Elmo's had buried the deal under layers of smiles and scripture. By dawn, I had 2 names scratched into my notebook: Corwin and Sterling Vance. One rich, one deadly. Corwin owned the land now. Vance had facilitated the exchange. Vance ran the guards, and the guards kept women like Mercy in wagons in camps in silence. She found the brothel by scent before we saw it. Perfume and pipe smoke, flesh too soft for the cold. A girl answered the door, no older than 15. "I'm looking for Sterling," Mercy said. "He don't take visits," the girl replied. "Tell him it's Thorne's daughter." The girl blinked once, then vanished inside. I put a hand on Mercy's shoulder. She shook it off. 5 minutes later, Sterling Vance appeared. He was tall, with teeth too white and boots too clean. His eyes took her in like she was livestock. "Thorne's daughter," he said, slow. "Didn't expect to see you standing." She didn't move. "You were meant to disappear," he added, "a quiet loss. Regrettable but useful." "I remember your hands," she said, her voice a low snarl. "I remember the iron crest, the way you held the gate open when they dragged me out." He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Memories are a funny thing," Atlas growled low. Vance reached for his belt. I shot first, clipping his wrist. The pistol dropped. Vance screamed. Mercy stepped forward and slammed the Colt into his knee. He collapsed, screaming. She knelt beside him. "You'll take me to Corwin," she said. "Now." The mansion sat west of the tracks, high on a rise with long windows. Corwin had bought himself the best view of the town's sins. We dragged Vance up the walk like a sack of meat. The butler opened the door and turned pale. "Tell him," Mercy said. Vance, through gritted teeth, whispered, "She's here." A few minutes passed. Then the door opened wider. August Corwin stood there in a velvet coat, the same seal on his collar as on the notary page. His hair was white, his eyes hollow. He stared at Mercy like she was smoke rising from the past. "You were a child," he said. "It was business." "I'm not a child now," I said. "You sold her. You signed her death." Corwin looked past us at the dog, the gun, the eyes full of fire. "I can't undo it," he said. "No, Mercy," replied her voice, cold and hard. "But you can pay." She raised the Colt. Corwin didn't flinch. He stepped forward. "If I'd known what you'd become," he said, "I'd have killed you myself." She shot him through the eye. Vance screamed again. I hit him across the jaw with the rifle butt. The butler ran. Atlas barked once. We left the house burning behind us. Back on the edge of town, Mercy sat beneath the sycamores, the gun across her lap, her face streaked with soot. I stood nearby, watching the road. "You could leave now," she said. "Go back to the land." I shook my head. She looked at me then, really looked for the first time. "I think you were meant to find me." "Atlas found you," I said. "He led you." We didn't speak again for a long while. At dusk, we headed north, back to the hills, back to the dirt that hadn't been stolen. The war wasn't over. But the ghosts were fewer now. Spring rode in on the back of frost and thunder. The ice melted hard, carving gullies through the trail, flooding the dry rivers with red water. Mercy never blinked at the storm. She rode through it like she belonged to the bones of the world, not its skin. We camped in the ruins of a burned chapel. Stone walls blackened, the crucifix fallen in two. The pews had been torn up for firewood long ago. I built the fire anyway, and Atlas curled beneath the altar like it was a den. Mercy knelt by the ruined pulpit, her fingers tracing carvings that hadn't burned, names, dates, prayers etched by people long forgotten. "You ever believe in God?" she asked. I threw a log on the fire. "When I was a boy." until I learned what men can do with his name. She nodded like she'd expected the answer. I used to pray, she said. In the camp before I forgot the words. She turned her eyes, catching the fire's edge. Do you believe in justice? I believe in consequence, I said. She stood. Then we'll go to Stonewater next. I looked up. Why there? It's where the child was taken. She took a breath that trembled at the edges. The first night I was dragged from my father's house. There was another girl younger, maybe 7. They said she'd fetch more coin. She screamed until they stuffed a rag in her mouth. I felt something tighten in my ribs. Mercy met my eyes, the cold fire burning in their depths. I left her behind. Stonewater was 5 days northeast, a mining town turned bone pit, once rich in ore, now choked with poverty and black lung. The company guards outnumbered the miners 3-1. Justice had no footing there. But Mercy wasn't looking for permission. She wore her coat tight and her gun loose. I kept my rifle wrapped in canvas, but my finger never strayed far from the trigger. Atlas walked ahead, hackles raised, teeth bared at every man who looked too long. We found the girl in a shack on the southern rim of the town behind the collapsed mill. Her name was Lily. She was 11 now, if that thin as a wire, eyes too old for her face. She sat on the floor stitching a sackcloth doll with fingers that had forgotten how to be a child. When Mercy stepped through the door, Lily flinched. Mercy crouched. I remember you, she said. You had a ribbon, yellow. Lily blinked. They took it. I know, Mercy said. Are you here to take me back? Mercy's voice dropped to a low, fierce murmur. Number, I'm here to burn it all down. The man who owned the mine was named Cyrus Hobb. He lived in a house made of brick when everyone else slept in rot. He employed the guards. He bought girls by the wagon load. The town bent around him like a rusted crown. I wanted to kill him outright, but Mercy had other plans. She spent the night gathering names. She found an old Union man who remembered his fire, found 3 miners who'd lost daughters, sisters, wives. She fed them whiskey and asked them questions no one had dared voice in years. By dawn, they had 20 names. By dusk, 20 men with pickaxes, knives, 2 rifles, and a thirst that hadn't been quenched in a decade. Mercy gave them the time just after midnight, when the guards changed and the dogs were fed. She didn't promise safety. She promised reckoning. The night burned blue with rage. They came in silence. No shouting, no chaos, just men who remembered what was taken. I took the south door. Mercy and Atlas circled the stables. One of the miners climbed the roof with a torch and a bottle of lamp oil. The first guard died before he drew a breath. The second ran. We let him. Cyrus Hobb was halfway to his cellar when Mercy found him. She didn't speak, just raised the Colt. He begged. She said, "Do you know how many nights I prayed for this?" He offered Coinland's silence. She looked at him, her eyes as cold as the snow he had traded for her life. She said I was 7, and shot him through the throat. The fire caught faster than expected. Flames jumped from roof to rafters, catching the oil, the walls, the history. Mercy walked out with Atlas at her side. Her eyes rimmed red, not from smoke, but something deeper, something clean. We left Stonewater at sunrise. Lily asleep in my saddle. Mercy walking beside the mare. No one followed. The mine burned until nothing stood. A week later, in a clearing by the river, Mercy gave Lily a piece of leather and taught her how to cut it into a ribbon yellow. I watched from a distance. I didn't speak. I knew the war was changing. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about making sure the world that killed Mercy once would never lay hands on a girl like Lily again. Summer dragged in dry and mean, splitting the land open with heat and hornets. The rivers shrank to threads, and the hills went mute. Mercy, me, and the girl Lily moved like ghosts through what was left of the country. We slept in abandoned barns, old way stations under trees, still bearing bullet holes from wars no one talked about. Lily learned fast. She watched Mercy clean the gun. Watched me mend boots, with a patience that spoke of years carried heavy. She never cried, not once. Not even when the fever hit her 2 days out of Granger's Bluff. We waited it out in a root cellar, Mercy laying wet cloths across the girl's brow, whispering things I couldn't hear. Atlas wouldn't leave the entrance, just lay flat, ears twitching as if something waited above. On the third morning, Lily sat up. I dreamed, the girl said. She had wings, but she flew into the ground. Mercy smoothed her hair. You won't, she whispered. I turned from the doorway. I'd buried others, carried girls smaller than Lily out of worse places. But this one, Mercy had chosen not to lose. We reached Hollow Creek in late July, a small town, mostly of farmhands and gravediggers. It didn't show up on most maps. The preacher there was a one-eyed ex-smuggler who married couples for bread and buried them for whiskey. Mercy asked him for a shovel, not for a grave, for the box. We found it 2 miles north beneath a dry oak. I remembered burying it the year the war ended. Inside a sealed pouch, a rusted key, and a letter unopened. Mercy broke the seal with her thumb. I stood silent while she read. She folded the paper and held it out. "I was promised to you," she said. "Signed in my father's hand." I took it, read the faded script, and then dropped it into the fire. "I don't want a promise made by a man who sold you," I said. Mercy looked down at her wrist, the scarred circle still pale and hard against her skin. "I don't either," she whispered. "In Hollow Creek, we rented a cabin that lined east. Lily slept on a cot. I patched the roof. Mercy worked the fields with her sleeves rolled and the Colt tucked under her belt like a warning carved in iron. For a time, things were still. Then one night, as the rain returned after months of silence, Atlas bristled at the door. I took my rifle. A figure stood in the dark, hat-soaked, hands raised. "I ain't armed," the man said. "Name's Morgan. I come from south." Mercy stepped beside me, her eyes sharp. "What do you want?" "I saw the fire at Stonewater. Saw what you did. And I got girls missing in my town. 2, maybe 3. Taken the same way. I figure maybe you're the kind that stops that sort of thing." Mercy said nothing for a long while, just stared at him. Then she nodded once. "You'll have to pay. I don't have coin." "Then bleed beside us," she said. The man nodded. And just like that, the war wasn't over. It was only moving. A year passed. Mercy rode less, but she trained Lily with flint, with powder, with eyes sharp for lies. She taught her how to track, how to disappear into the world without losing herself. I worked the edges of towns, whispering to widows, ex-soldiers, orphans who remembered faces in the dark. We left notes in tree hollows, signals in twine and stone, a quiet army rising from the forgotten. We called it the ash mark for the brand on Mercy's wrist for what was burned and could not be rebuilt. One evening, Mercy stood at the edge of the wheat field behind the cabin. The sky was blood orange, the wind low. Atlas sat beside her, his muzzle gray now. Lily picked flowers near the fence line. I leaned against the porch rail, watching. "You ever wonder," Mercy said, "what might have happened if I'd stayed dead?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Number." She looked back at me. "Why not?" "Because you didn't," I said, "and everything after that is yours." She turned toward the horizon, a sad, slow smile on her lips. "No," she said, "it's hers now." And she nodded toward the girl, a yellow ribbon in her hair, a knife on her belt, boots dusted with soil. The wind moved like breath across the field. Mercy raised her hand and Atlas followed without command. I stepped off the porch and Lily smiled, small and strange, like someone who had seen both hell and the way out. The land didn't change, but the people walking it had. That was enough. That was the ending she chose. And she never looked back.